helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
hello, it is midday. Welcome to GB Newsday with me, Gloria De Piero and Alistair Stewart.
Yesterday, in a monumental day in the history of the United Kingdom, Queen Elizabeth II was buried in a private ceremony in Windsor, bringing an end to the reign of the country's longest-serving monarch. We'll be analysing what this means for the future of our great country throughout today's programme.
And politics is back in what promises to be a busy week for new Prime Minister Liz Truss. She's set to unveil plans on how to combat the NHS backlog and to support families through the cost of living crisis.
And also, the Prime Minister is set to meet with United States President Joe Biden and other world leaders at the United Nations General Assembly in New York, marking her first foreign trip as Prime Minister, with the agenda set to focus on the war in Ukraine and the global crisis in food security.
Before that, at 1 minute past midday, it is time for the latest news with Tamsin.
Gloria, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Liz Truss says negotiations for a post-Brexit free trade deal with the US will not restart for years. The Prime Minister made the admission as she flew to New York to speak at the United Nations General Assembly ahead of a meeting with the US President Joe Biden. Mr Biden has stalled on trade negotiations and expressed concerns that the Northern Ireland Protocol could damage the peace process. The Prime Minister has also pledged to give at least £2.3 billion in military aid to Ukraine next year. Liz Truss says the UK will match or exceed the record support given to President Zelensky's troops in their fight against Russian aggression. The royal household is observing a week of mourning following the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. Flags across the UK are now flying at full mast, but they'll remain at half-mast on royal estates, and family members aren't expected to carry out any official duties during this period. The Culture Secretary says the latest figures suggest around 250,000 people filed past the Queen's coffin whilst it was lying in state. Madeleine McCann's parents have lost a case against a former Portuguese policeman who alleged they were involved in their daughter's disappearance. The European Court of Human Rights ruled they were given a fair hearing in Portugal in a libel case against the detective. The court says any reputational damage was the result of local police making the couple official suspects rather than the detectives' claims. Around 6 million people with disabilities will receive an automatic one-off payment of £150 today. The majority of eligible people can expect the financial boost by the start of October. Work and Pensions Secretary Chloe Smith says the payment is part of a support package to help those struggling with the cost of living crisis.
We acknowledge that these are worrying times for households, and in particular for disabled people who do, of course, face additional costs. We understand that, and that's why we're acting. So the government has made sure that there is at least £1,200 of support going to the most vulnerable households. The payments we're talking about this week will be arriving automatically, which I hope again is some reassurance to people. And that is in addition to what we're now setting out to support people with the costs of energy.
A coroner has offered his deepest sympathies to the family of Molly Russell, who took her own life after watching content on social media which raised concerns. The 14-year-old looked at tens of thousands of online posts before she died in November 2017, including material which was linked to anxiety, depression and self-harm. An inquest which reopened this morning will consider whether algorithms contributed to her death. Culture Secretary Michelle Donnellan says legislation is being brought forward to tighten internet safety.
We've heard some horrific stories of people accessing suicide forums, of getting content on social media groups that is drastically inappropriate for their age group, and it can have devastating consequences because it can influence young people and children who are not of an age that should be looking at that content. And this government is responsible, decisive, and that's why we're going to bring forward this legislation to protect children and young people under the age of 18.
Police investigating the disappearance of a 70-year-old woman are offering a £20,000 reward. Norma Girolami from Highgate in North London was last seen last summer. The Met Police says she took a train from Barking to Leigh-on-Sea and back again in August, but wasn't heard of again from that evening. A man has been charged with her murder and is currently in custody awaiting trial. A man who murdered his wife almost 40 years ago will become the first prisoner to have a public parole board hearing. Russell Causley killed Carol Packman in 1985, but has never revealed where he hid her body. His grandson applied for the hearing to be made public. He hopes it will help ensure that killers who refuse to reveal where their victims are buried stay behind bars. The new Justice Secretary is set to meet with striking barristers for the first time since they walked out over pay. Brandon Lewis will sit down with the Criminal Bar Association, something his predecessor, Dominic Raab, had refused to do during the strike. Criminal barristers are due to receive a 15% pay rise from the end of this month, but they argue it will only apply to new cases and not those sitting in the backlog. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, back to Gloria and Alistair.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. From a constitutional turning point witnessed by emperors, presidents and prime ministers to a moving family affair, yesterday's state funeral yielded much pageantry and much raw emotion.
Well, GB News' Cameron Walker looks back at the historic state funeral for the Queen yesterday.
An event planned for decades, but military precision all came down to this moment. A final farewell to a queen who reigned over us for more than 70 years. Her Majesty's coffin was taken in procession from Westminster Hall, where thousands had filed past to pay their respects, in the state gun carriage of the Royal Navy, pulled by 142 Royal Naval ratings. A tradition dating back to the time of Queen Victoria. At the King's request, the wreath on top of the coffin contained flowers from the gardens of Buckingham Palace, Clarence House and Highgrove, rosemary for remembrance, and myrtle, the ancient symbol of a happy marriage, used in the Queen's own wedding bouquet in 1947. A handwritten note from the King read, "In loving and devoted memory, signed Charles R." A life of service was accompanied by a life in the public eye. Members of the royal family, their dignity and stoicism shone through in the face of unimaginable grief. Princess Charlotte's choice of brooch in the shape of a horseshoe was gifted by her great-grandmother, the Queen. She, alongside her future king brother George, processed behind the coffin with their parents, the Prince and Princess of Wales.
Her late Majesty famously declared on a 21st birthday broadcast that her whole life would be dedicated to serving the nation and Commonwealth. Rarely has such a promise been so well kept.
The Queen was consulted on all of the funeral plans. The hymn you're hearing was played at the Queen's wedding to Prince Philip in 1947. Mounties of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police led the procession from Westminster Abbey to Wellington Arch. Crowds shared in the King's grief, witnessing him and members of his family march behind his mother's coffin. A state hearse brought the Queen's coffin for the committal service at Windsor Castle. More than 800 people, including the Queen's personal staff, filled St George's Chapel. In stark contrast to Prince Philip's funeral, where just 30 people could attend because of COVID restrictions. The imperial state crown, the orb and the sceptre were removed from the coffin and placed on the high altar. The King then placed the Queen's camp colour of the Grenadier Guards on the coffin. The wand broken, creating the symmetry with the three instruments of state being removed, ready to be passed on to their successor.
But the merciful goodness of the Lord endureth for ever and ever upon them that fear him.
The Queen was buried with her late husband, Prince Philip, in a private service. Royal mourning continues, grieving together as a family. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Powerful reminders there, not least one of the most poignant moments of the whole affair, the piper playing and then fading into the distance. Well, Cameron has joined us live in the studio now. Pick you up on that point towards the end there. National mourning is over, but for the family, it continues.
Yes, if you look at a royal residence, the flag will still be flying at half-mast, apart from the Royal Standard, of course. This is going to continue for another 7 days, and then at 8 a.m. on the 7 days after the funeral, the flags will be put back up to their full position. We're not expecting members of the royal family to take part in any engagements over the next week or so. I think this is perhaps their private time to grieve the head of their family that they have lost. Of course, over the last 10 days, they've had to mourn very much in the glare of the public eye. So I think this is their time to do it in private.
And nobody would begrudge that for the family. We did see some grief etched on the faces of some senior royals, didn't we, Cameron?
We did. I think overall their dignity and stoicism really shone through, but at times it was clear to see they were visibly emotional. In fact, there's a photograph, I don't know if we've got it, but in a number of the papers this morning, there's this photograph of the King kind of welling up and his sister, Princess Anne, looking at him, kind of supporting him. And I think moments like that, when you see members of the royal family visibly emotional, really hits home to the public at home watching it on television.
Yeah, Helen Mackay, I think, was the person who took the photograph, and I certainly spotted it in the Telegraph. They've given it virtually 2 pages. It is quite remarkable. The King, however, despite what you just said, had to carry on working in some respects because he had to meet, for example, those tricky Commonwealth leaders, and clearly he had to meet his Prime Minister as well. And that was one thing that really struck me, that here is a guy, a son and a father and a brother who is mourning but is still Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
The crown lives on, and he has to dedicate his life to duty, as he said in that speech he gave the day after his mother died. I think one of the great powers of Her Majesty the Queen is this power of soft diplomacy, and that's something we saw King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla do at the Buckingham Palace reception on the eve of the funeral with those heads of states, those world leaders.
And you mentioned Camilla there. I think we've learned throughout this period just how important the support is that she gives to King Charles.
Yes, exactly. The King, in a number of the speeches or messages he has sent over the last 10 days, said he almost relies on his wife, Camilla, for the support that she has given him. And you could see it. She was there by his side at every public point throughout this 10 days period, and I think that's going to continue on into the future. And if you think back to, it seems a long time ago now, but February, when the Queen, during her Accession Day message, said that it was her express wish that Camilla would one day be known as Queen Consort, and that's exactly what has happened, and that's exactly what will continue to happen.
It's almost like the laying on of the hands. I mean, it was, although it was a wee while ago, it was extraordinary. You were talking there as well about succession and about continuity, but one thing, and you and I and Gloria, we've all worked on it now for so long, going back best part of 2 weeks. In a way, it began with that Accession Council, the Privy Council, with Penny Mordaunt as what is the title? Remind me.
Lord President.
Lord President of the Council, presiding. But also it ended exactly with that, what we're showing folk at home now, and the Lord Chamberlain snapping the wand, and the standard being placed on the coffin, and then the regalia, as you said, the crown jewels, back on the altar. These are things we have never ever seen before.
No, the camp colour of the Grenadier Guards we just saw placed on the coffin by His Majesty the King, and I think it was that moment when the crown jewels were taken and placed onto the high altar. That was the end of the Elizabethan era and bringing in the new era. And I think it's very interesting that the Accession Day Council that you were just referring to, Alistair, was televised for the first time. It's giving the British public a front row view of proceedings for the first time, giving them that personal connection to the monarchy.
You captured it brilliantly from start to finish, Cameron.
You
been great working with you.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you very much indeed. Cameron Walker there, our royal reporter. Now, the period of national mourning has indeed come to an end. UK politics is back in full swing. The Prime Minister, as we said at the beginning of the programme, is indeed in New York for the United Nations General Assembly. There, alongside the major meeting, she will meet also with President Joe Biden and, interesting one, President Macron.
Then later this week, we hear more on the government's plans to help businesses with the rising cost of energy. And on Friday, the mini budget happens, containing promised tax cuts to try and boost the economy.
Well, Tom Harwood is at Downing Street for us now, and he has just come fresh out of what's called the lobby, which is nudge, nudge, whisper in ears and tell you what's really going on. So, nudge, nudge, share. What is going on?
Well, we've got some words in terms of Liz Truss's mission in New York for the next couple of days. We're told that Liz Truss is going there really to present the case from the United Kingdom to focus those talks on the economic and security crisis caused by Putin's illegal war in Ukraine. And that's an interesting phrase. We keep hearing from the Truss administration, Putin's illegal war in Ukraine. I think that's a phrase we're going to hear a lot of, potentially, from the Prime Minister in the next couple of days. She will be urging international partners, we're told, to stay the course, worrying that some Ukraine fatigue may be setting in, and really trying to lead the way in terms of committing the same amount of support next year as was provided this year. That's billions of pounds of support for the military and indeed domestic reconstruction effort in Ukraine. I expect that we'll be seeing British pressure on other countries, particularly some some of those more reticent European countries to join with the United Kingdom in taking that strong line and hopefully bringing this conflict to an end by the time of the next UN General Assembly meeting next September. That would, of course, ease a lot of cost of living pressures. But also, we've got some more details about the bilateral meetings that Liz Truss is taking today, not just with President Macron, but also the Prime Minister of Japan, the President of Lithuania, and a visit to the Ukrainian Institute in New York as well, meeting with the First Lady of Ukraine and Ukraine's Foreign Minister. Of course, President Zelensky has said that he'll be staying in Ukraine throughout that crisis, although only a few days ago there was a vote in the UN General Assembly to allow President Zelensky to virtually address the chamber. That will be happening this week as well. So it's a busy day for Liz Truss, but she's not the only British minister in New York. She's also going to be joined by the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly and the Development Minister Vicky Ford as well, who will be taking meetings further down the week. And of course, turning back to Westminster, as you mentioned as well, tomorrow morning we'll see details on that business support and that Northern Ireland support as well to areas where legislation may be required to help people with their energy bills. Number 10 has been insisting that new legislation isn't required to help people in Scotland, England and in Wales to lower that energy price cap. The statute is there to do that. And then on Thursday, a health announcement. How is the UK going to get through the winter? How is that NHS backlog going to be dealt with? We'll hear details from Therese Coffey, the Deputy Prime Minister and new Health Secretary. And also, as you mentioned, Friday, assuming a programme motion goes through on Thursday, because it's not normal for big events to happen on Friday. There needs to be a motion in the House to allow the House to sit in full on Friday. But we're expecting, if that goes through on Thursday, then that fiscal statement on Friday morning. It's a very busy week in Westminster.
And when she is back and when politics gets back to business in earnest, do we expect to see that row that started to brew over who will pay for the cost of helping with our energy bills? And if I can have a second question with you, uncapping bonuses uncapping the rate of
the bankers' bonuses.
Is that really going to happen, Tom?
Well, let's take your second question first, because that wasn't directly asked of the Prime Minister's spokesman today, but questions around that were asked. And when it comes to what Liz Truss is really saying, what her administration responds to around these economic questions, around questions of changing regulations or the fiscal structure of the United Kingdom, the words that were used from Number 10 is this is an unashamedly pro-growth administration. Unashamedly pro-growth. And that means, likely, that this is an administration that will take decisions that might be seen to be unpopular, that might be seen to be poor timing, frankly, but that may well tick up or contribute to ticking up the growth rate in the UK. Of course, the argument from Number 10 is that by capping the amount that bankers can be paid, well, the highest earning bankers will just move to New York or Singapore or somewhere else. Whereas if you allow them to earn more money here, guess what? They'll pay more tax here. That's what Number 10 will be saying. Of course, there will, however, be the political opposition that this is a bad look to do. So we'll be seeing some of that coming on. And to answer your first question as well, yes, of course, we'll be seeing the Labour Party arguing about the idea of who pays for the enormous fiscal intervention to freeze energy bills. But it won't be this Wednesday because there's no Prime Minister's questions this Wednesday. Indeed, the House of Commons tomorrow will be devoted to members of Parliament swearing their oaths of allegiance, or indeed affirming their oaths of allegiance to the new king.
Tom, as ever, Tom Howard live in Downing Street for us. Thank you. Coming up after the break, we will be discussing the cost of living crisis as the Prime Minister is set to have that busy week of announcements, as Tom was telling us, to help people across the country. That's after your weather.
Hello, quite a lot of cloud around for many of us over the next couple of days. There will be some breaks in the cloud, allowing a little brightness to come through at times, but for the majority of us, it is a dry looking picture, and that's all thanks to this large area of high pressure dominating the weather across much of the UK, both today and through much of the rest of the week. But there is a change coming. This weather front, which is bringing thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain to the far north and northwest of Scotland, will eventually make progress southeastwards, but not until the latter part of the week. Until then, it's a largely dry picture, quite a lot of cloud around for many of us, and that cloud just about thick enough to produce a few light drizzly showers here and there, but that's the exception rather than the rule. And as I mentioned, there will be some breaks in the cloud at times, so a little bit of brightness here and there. And it's more of the same through this evening and overnight. Still a good deal of cloud around, still a largely dry picture, just some more persistent rain at times for the far northwest of Scotland. And actually that cloud might break up a little bit overnight tonight, but it will be a mild one. Temperatures for most of us remaining in double figures. And we could see a little bit of mist and fog developing, particularly so across parts of East Anglia and the south east of England. And that will be with us first thing tomorrow morning, eventually melting away once the sunshine gets going. But then for most of us, after a fairly bright start for many, will start to cloud over once again as the day progresses. Temperatures generally high teens or just about nudging into the low 20s, so feeling fairly pleasant if you do get a glimpse of that sunshine. And then, as I mentioned, this thicker cloud with outbreaks of rain associated with that weather front does start to make slow progress southeastwards later in the day tomorrow, and more especially on Thursday and Friday, but very slow progress indeed. So for some of us, we'll be underneath that cloud and rain, for others remaining dry. Bye for now.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
So we're chatting to Tom Harwood about the fact that on Friday, Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng will be unveiling that long-awaited mini-budget, giving more details about the government's energy support package designed to help households faced with spiralling energy bills. But before that, tomorrow morning, the new Business Secretary, Jacob Rees-Mogg, will unveil support for businesses faced with sky-high fuel bills.
Well, to discuss that business support package and the rest of it, I'm delighted to be joined now by our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. first things first, what is that long-awaited and much argued over business package going to look like?
Even before that, well done to you and the GB News team for the funeral coverage. I've been watching it avidly over the last week, and it was absolutely fantastic. And you are now officially, Alistair Stewart, my mum's favourite.
Bless her.
Aside from all that, the business... Now, here on GB News, rightly, we often focus on household energy fuel bills. Our listeners and viewers are obviously really concerned, and the government has announced there will be a big energy support package for households. Liz Truss announced it in the Commons. Then there was ghastly news about Her Majesty came through. It was truncated. The details of that will be laid out on Friday. But in my GB News coverage and broadcasts, I've stressed for many months what this energy crisis means for businesses. Yeah. There is no energy price cap for businesses. And this is the problem, Alistair. There are many energy-intensive businesses across the Midlands, across the North. Those red wall seats the Tories need to win again. Their energy bills are going up 4, 5, 8-fold. And if you don't believe me, I know you do, but just listen to this interview. I did an interview just before the death of the Queen, unfortunately, with a friend of GB News, the CEO of JCB, no less, a brilliant British company, an iconic British company. He's Graham MacDonald, and this is what he told me about his energy bills.
So we have a contract that's expired where we're paying roughly £112 per megawatt hour for electricity. The spot market today is £750 per megawatt hour. Right. So it's 700% increase. Now, if I buy forward today for this winter coming, of winter 22, it's around about that price, £700. If you buy forward for summer next year, it's down at £450. If you buy winter 23, it's down again at 3. So the forward contracts are actually showing some pressures coming off energy costs. And, you know, who knows what other major geopolitical issues may happen in the world that might drive other events.
Now, JCB obviously it's a big player. Yeah. They've got 11 factories in the UK, 11 more factories across the world. But even JCB, with all their negotiating skill and acumen, they're paying £112 per megawatt hour now. That's the unit of electricity they're using. They use a lot of electricity, and that's going to £700. And if you're a small business, if you're running a pub, a restaurant, if you're running a small manufacturing firm, we are seeing fuel bills going up 4, 5, 8-fold. There is a cliff edge coming when these contracts expire this autumn, and businesses are desperate to know whether or not they're going to still be viable as a result of this energy support package.
And we'll find out more details of that tomorrow. But this week is a massive week for economic news, isn't it? Politics is back. Just tell us about the other economic news that we're going to get.
Well, I've had a few days off as watching your fabulous coverage, Alistair, and the rest of the team, but it is going to be a really busy week for economics. So tomorrow we've got that business energy support package. That'll be at 9 o'clock in the morning. It won't be in Parliament because, as Tom Harwood's is saying, a lot of new MPs are getting sworn in. Then on Wednesday, we've got the Federal Reserve, the US Central Bank. They're going to hike interest rates by a lot. And then on Thursday, we've got an interest rate decision by the Bank of England. We're expecting interest rates to go up to 2.5%, up by 0.75 percentage point, what economists call 75 basis points. That's the biggest interest rate rise since 2008. And then that will impact businesses, that will impact firms. And then on Friday, as if you hadn't had enough of business and economics, there's going to be that mini budget. The government's only calling it a mini budget, so the Office for Budget Responsibility doesn't have to lay out assumptions and forecasts, which may be actually quite inconvenient for the government. That would be controversial. But just go back to Graham MacDonald for a moment, because it is significant when a serious business leader like him speaks out. He is generally quite optimistic, not least for JCB. They operate all around the world. You know, when companies involved in infrastructure projects across the emerging markets and so on. But he did say, in his view, the real blot on the horizon isn't inflation now, which he thinks is coming off. He thinks it's these interest rate rises, which in his view could be excessive. Here he is.
Look, in the next 12 months, I think one of the big threats right now. I've given my view on inflation, but it depends what governments do with interest rates. I think that could slow down investment rapidly if they push to, and I understand why they're doing it, but I think it's maybe an overreaction. So I think if interest rates go too high, then that could be a dampener on the economy and the world economy, not just the UK.
Tom also said that at the Downing Street briefing in the last hour, the Truss mantra of unashamedly pro-growth was repeated again and again and again. They want to listen to people like JCB, don't they?
Of course, on Friday, Alistair, we'll be focused on what these announcements mean for our GB News viewers and listeners, whether they're householders, they're running businesses, working in companies that have got high energy bills, they'll be concerned. But there's also going to be a step change in policy making on Friday. Trussonomics.
Yeah.
Borrowing is going up. And Truss and her Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, they're cutting taxes into the face of higher borrowing. A lot of people say that is a big risk, so that's going to be very controversial on Friday. And just to say, if viewers and listeners do want to hear the full 20-minute version of my conversation with Graham McDonald, the CEO of JCB, they could do so via the GB News app, the Money Talks podcast, and on the GB News YouTube channel.
Well worth doing on past experience, and particularly the gentleman from JCB, who is a total star. I think you and I are together on Friday, aren't we? Are we all
Fingers crossed.
Here on Friday? but we should be there. You won't miss a thing. Liam, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Coming up, we'll be getting the latest from the UN General Assembly. That's where the Prime Minister is. First, it's your news update.
Good afternoon, it's 12:34. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Liz Truss says negotiations for a post-Brexit free trade deal with the US will not restart for years. The Prime Minister made the admission as she flew to New York to speak at the United Nations General Assembly ahead of a meeting with US President Joe Biden. Mr. Biden has stalled on trade negotiations and expressed concerns that the Northern Ireland Protocol could damage the peace process. The Prime Minister has also pledged to give at least £2.3 billion in military aid to Ukraine next year. Liz Truss says the UK will match or exceed the record support given to President Zelensky's troops in their fight against Russian aggression. The royal household is observing a week of mourning following the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. Flags across the UK are now flying at full mast, but they'll remain at half-mast on royal estates. And family members aren't expected to carry out any official duties during this period. The Culture Secretary says the latest figures suggest around 250,000 people filed past the Queen's coffin whilst it was lying in state. Madeleine McCann's parents have lost a case against a former Portuguese policeman who alleged they were involved in their daughter's disappearance. The European Court of Human Rights ruled they were given a fair hearing in Portugal in a libel case against the detective. The court says any reputational damage was the result of local police making the couple official suspects rather than the detective's claims. Around 6 million people with disabilities will receive a one-off payment of £150 today. The money is part of a package of support to help those struggling with the cost of living crisis. The majority of eligible people can expect the financial boost by the start of October. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere though, Gloria and Alistair will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
The time is 12:38. Liz Truss is expected to meet with President Joe Biden and other world leaders at a UN General Assembly in New York.
In her first foreign trip as Prime Minister, Liz Truss will focus on the war in Ukraine and the global crisis in food security. That all comes as political duties resume after the period of national mourning for Her Majesty the Queen.
Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is in New York and sent us this report.
Well, it's 2 weeks today since Liz Truss became Prime Minister. What an extraordinary couple of weeks it has been, clearly dominated by that national period of mourning, which effectively meant that lots of government business ground to a halt. But with the Queen's funeral yesterday and that national period of mourning now at an end, politics is grinding back into gear again. And Liz Truss is embarking on her first foreign trip as Prime Minister here to New York to attend the United Nations General Assembly. And she's got a busy couple of days ahead, meeting lots of different world leaders, including Emmanuel Macron, the French President, the Prime Minister of Spain, the President of Turkey, the EU Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, and, of course, US President Joe Biden. She was due to meet him in Downing Street on Sunday, but that got cancelled, and now it's going to go ahead on the sidelines here of the United Nations in New York. What's likely to dominate? Well, clearly Ukraine, given the concerns that war is now grinding into a autumn and winter that could get quite difficult despite recent successes. Could there be possibly more military aid or other support in different forms? Energy security is also likely to play a big role here. And also, it's difficult, I think, probably to get away from Brexit. It's certainly going to come up, I would have thought, in those discussions with Emmanuel Macron and with Ursula von der Leyen, not least of all because the Northern Ireland Protocol still hasn't been sorted. So politics is very much back in game here in New York City. She is also, the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, going to make a speech at the United Nations tomorrow night at the General Assembly, an annual event that takes place every year, but another big platform for the new British Prime Minister. And then it's back to home and to London, where the politics is simply not going to stop, because we're expecting a mini budget effectively on Friday ahead of the party conference season as Parliament comes back into session too. So it is, after an extraordinary couple of weeks for the Prime Minister, going to be another testing time for her, but a big moment as she makes her first foreign trip here to New York.
And Darren McCaffrey will be live with us in about an hour and a half.
Well, with more political news on the agenda in what promises to be an extremely a busy week for the Prime Minister, I'm delighted to say that joining us now live in the studio is GB News political reporter Catherine Foster. One interesting thing that just struck me listening there to Darren is that virtually all of them in New York know her as Foreign Secretary Truss. None of them know her as Prime Minister, clearly. But nor do we very much yet, because politics was put on hold because of the Queen's death.
Exactly. It seems almost unbelievable that precisely 2 weeks ago we were sitting here watching her arrive at Balmoral and the late Queen asking her to form a government. 2 weeks ago, and the world has changed so much since then. And then, of course, she literally came back. She had one day a full normal day, if you like, with Prime Minister's questions, she made the huge announcement about support for energy bills, which would have led the news for days and days and days. And then at lunchtime, everything changed. And politics was quite rightly paused. But now we have, if you like, a second relaunch this week. She's had a couple of days as PM in her normal role. Then we've had this hiatus, and she has quite rightly been in the background, though she has been attending events and being supportive and paying respects. But now they want to hit the ground running this week.
And she's getting a bit of flack because she said she doesn't expect talks on a trade deal with the US to start in the short or medium term. And if we sort of rewind back to what Donald Trump, when he was president, said to Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister, he said Britain and the US would be able to strike, I quote, a massive trade deal after Brexit.
Yes, it's disappointing news, but I think probably not very much of a surprise. And obviously, although the UK has obviously been very keen on this, we've been much keener on it and needed it much more than the States. So going back to Obama, Brexit, you'll be the back of the queue. Trump, no, you'll be the front of the queue. Donald Trump made all the right noises, but as soon as Biden came along, that sort of seemed to go on the back burner, and especially with tensions over the Northern Ireland Protocol. So it's interesting now because Liz Truss, as International Trade Minister, was one of the biggest proponents of the possibilities and the chances of us getting this deal, how it would benefit the economy. But now we have a very honest, I think, admission that actually this is going nowhere for at least the short to medium term.
The other thing that a lot of folk, not a lot of people watch GB News, viewers and listeners, is the degree to which she has to fill the vacated boots of Boris Johnson. And many felt that Ukraine was one of the acid tests that would see whether or not she was up to measure. And she's hit the ground running on Ukraine.
She has. She's certainly putting out a message that I think in terms of Ukraine, she is going to be continuity Johnson. She said we're going to spend at least as much as we have already. Next year, we will be a key ally. And I think obviously there was concern in Ukraine because Boris Johnson had very personally championed helping. But I think that will continue, and I think they will be relieved to hear that.
And folk listening to this conversation on radio rather than watching it on TV will have just seen Zelensky of Ukraine with Ursula von der Leyen of the European Union. So there is a gap there post-Boris that needs to be filled PDQ in Zelensky's affections as well as the British public's.
Yes, there is. And I think obviously there is concern that as we come into the winter and prices rise and possible energy rationing across Europe, that some of the European countries might go slightly colder on support for Ukraine when it's directly affecting their citizens, not just financially, but also possibly, heating going off. I mean, we've already seen energy rationing in Germany, haven't we?
Yeah.
And is this the week, the first really full week that Liz Truss is being Prime Minister in a public way? Is this the week where we find out what her priorities are, what her philosophy is?
Yes, they are. An aide has said they're trying to cram like 2 weeks of announcements into 4 days before they go into recess. So it's going to be an absolutely frantic week. So tomorrow we'll have the business announcement for support for businesses. Obviously, households know what's happening, businesses don't, and they urgently need to have that information. That's Wednesday. Thursday, Deputy Prime Minister Therese Coffey, also Health Secretary, big announcement on her plans for how to get the NHS through the winter, focused on their Whitehall jargon, if you like, is ABCD. So ambulance, backlogs in waiting lists, care. D is for dentistry and doctors and changing the pension regulations. So a huge amount. And obviously we're hearing these horror stories from the NHS, aren't we? So that's very key to people too. And then, of course, on Friday, the mini-budget, they can't call it a budget, but the
fiscal event.
The fiscal event, which will be very significant and a very different direction to Boris Johnson, going clearly for big tax cuts, big reversals of policies brought in terms of reversing the corporation tax rise, reversing the national insurance rise, cutting green levies, a very, very different feel to the government.
Finally, if I'm allowed to, if we've got time, just as you were giving that brilliant answer there, another thought crossed my mind when you said Therese Coffey, just in passing. Of course, formerly Work and Pensions, but now Health Secretary. And we saw Chloe Smith, didn't we, in the news bulletin?
We did.
There she is now. She was in government, out of government, back in now, looking after disabilities. This is a new team that's got to hit the ground running, not just a new Prime Minister.
Absolutely. There's been a huge number of changes. There's very, very few people left in Cabinet that were there under Boris Johnson. Very few.
Brilliant. Great to talk to you always. Thank you very much indeed.
Just one thought, because there has been just the news just before we came on air that there's going to be a by-election in a safe Labour seat.
Oh, yes.
So not much drama expected, at least. Catherine, just tell us who's standing down.
Rosie Cooper, who's Labour MP for West Lancashire, has accepted a job as head of an NHS trust in Liverpool, so there will be a by-election. Now, it's a safe Labour seat. It's been Labour since, I think, 1992. But obviously, it'll be interesting to watch, probably not who's going to win it, but by what margin they will win it.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you, Catherine Forster, our political reporter.
Great to see you. Thanks very much indeed.
Well, as Parliament resumes, one contentious subject which is bound to rear its head is the online safety bill. This morning, Culture Secretary Michelle Donlan spoke to GB News.
So first of all, I want to be clear, our overriding objective with the online safety bill, and the reason why it was in the manifesto in the first place, is because our legislation does have to keep pace with changes and technology. And at the moment, I would argue that children and young people aren't necessarily safe when accessing some platforms where it is user-generated. And that's why we've seen some horrendous and heartbreaking incidences. And that's why it needs to be changed. So that is not going to be edited within the bill, just to reassure your viewers. The bit that you point out about the element in relation to adults, about free speech, we are going to change because we need to make sure that we get that balance right there. Looking at that content, and this government is responsible, decisive, and that's why we're going to bring forward this legislation to protect children and young people under the age of 18, but we will be amending the legislation. I agree with you that some of the elements of this bill in relation to adults and free speech, the balance isn't quite right. And as you will see in the coming weeks, this is a government that are not afraid to make the bold decisions and the bold choices, but also we're not afraid to revisit things if we think that they're not in the interests of the public at large.
Michelle Donlan there, the new Culture Secretary, as we were talking about new readers start here. Nadine Dorries out, Ms Donlan in. Now, changing tack, 47 people have been arrested as part of an operation to deter further disorder and violence in Leicester.
This follows tensions involving sections of the Hindu and Muslim communities over the weekend after a Pakistan versus India cricket match escalated to violence.
Well, police faced significant aggression in seeking to deal with the crowds, and temporary Chief Constable for Leicester, Rob Nixon, said officers had been brought in, and I quote, from all sorts of different parts of the country to help with that operation.
Joining us now in the studio is GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White. What's going on in Leicester?
Well, it's been bubbling on for a few weeks now. 28th of August was when we had this cricket match, India-Pakistan. India won, and hundreds of young men, mainly from the Hindu community, went out onto the streets of East Leicester to celebrate, and there was lots of sort of sporadic violence that occurred then, videos that were posted on social media with what were very sort of hateful chants against the Muslim and Pakistani communities. That sparked even more in the way of tension and fights, and it just escalated over a couple of weeks, and it got really bad this past weekend, where on Saturday and Sunday we saw very significant violence in Leicester. And it meant, as you read in your introduction there, that police officers that were being deployed down to the capital to help out with the Royal Funeral Policing operation had to be then diverted back to Leicester to help out with that very significant...
And looking at those pictures that folk watching on television, let's describe it for folk listening on radio, in goodly numbers by the look of it.
Yeah, I mean, this was serious disorder. Yeah. Leicestershire police have told us that 25 police officers and a police dog were injured during this weekend's violence. They also say that in total, some 47 people have been arrested since all of this began on the 28th of August. 20 arrested this past weekend, just 2 arrested on the Saturday. Now, there has been some criticism of the fact that, well, the most significant violence happened on the Saturday, yet you only made 2 arrests. What Leicestershire police say in defence of that argument is that when you're dealing with very significant disorder like this, the last thing you want to do is just pitch in and start arresting people. What you're trying to do is contain it, separate both sides, ensure that it can disperse peacefully. That doesn't mean that those people involved in the worst of that disorder won't be brought to justice at some point. There's CCTV, police with video cameras,
and a lot of social media by the sound of it as well.
Exactly. And Leicester's Britain's most diverse city and has long been praised for its good community relations.
Yeah, in the sort of Leicester metropolitan area, talking more than 800,000 people, up to 40% of the city are from the South Asian area, from either South Asian heritage or directly from South Asia that have come and settled in this country. And despite that, yes, there have been good relations with all sections of the community over the years. Having said that, though, there have been incidents, particularly around cricket matches, where you get one side or the other celebrating very publicly. That has raised tensions around.
Let me ask you a slightly delicate question. I'm conscious of that as well. But you're our home and security expert. Why is it that your sources are so confident that this is between faith groups, people of a different belief, different culture, as opposed to simply a bunch of people who wanted Pakistan to win, saw India win and thought they'd have a punch-up?
Yeah, I mean, that's effectively what it is, though. But underneath that, you've got the ethnic tensions, the religious tensions that we see played out so often on the Indian subcontinent that has spilled over, as it sometimes does.
Almost as an excuse for a punch-up, then.
Of course, but it's just, it's young men intolerant of each other, and whatever their ethnicity and religious background, that's secondary at the end of the day. But they were doing this while the rest of the country mourned the death of Queen Elizabeth.
Sure.
And there is concern that going forward, it's been bubbling over since August the 28th, that we could still have more in the way of disorder.
Mark, thanks very much indeed. And I fear you're absolutely right as well. It is one of those stories. It really does matter. But such have been the last couple of weeks that an awful lot is bubbling along there that we can now return to. And we're in safe hands with you, keeping an eye on it as well. Mark White, thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you. Alistair, just noting this report just breaking, Labour's Kevin Brennan, he is 62, he's the MP for Cardiff West. He has undergone surgery for prostate cancer, just to bring you...
He's a good bloke.
Yeah, Cardiff West, MP, 62 years old, very, very common.
Wish him
prostate cancer.
Wish him well, but also don't forget all people out there, whether it's Tracy Crouch and checking your bits and bumps or whatever she called them, or chaps checking on prostate and the rest of it. Cancer remains a killer. Get yourself checked, look after yourself, and join us in wishing Kevin the best of luck in his recovery.
Your views on the politics of the day now on the Queen's funeral. Anthony has been in touch to say, through the magnificence and sorrow of the funeral, our Princess Royal Anne stood out and supported her brother with love and silent presence.
And do look out that photograph that we were all talking about a little earlier. It is really deeply moving. It's just the eye line of a sister to a brother. John writes in to say what the world saw yesterday was real commemoration, real celebration, real respect, and the real United Kingdom.
Chris says, for a moment, the alleged squabbles over uniforms seemed unworthy. The saga over insignia and irrelevance in Westminster Abbey, which has borne witness to truly momentous chapters in Britain's history. Reports of the vanity of Prince Andrew and Prince Harry were reduced to mere petty detail.
All opinion is there and all opinion is welcome. You're watching GB News TV and radio. Do keep getting in touch with us. You can either do it by gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet Gloria or tweet me or tweet at GB News.
And we'll be reading more of your thoughts out, so do continue to get in touch. But that's us for the first hour. In the next hour, we'll be talking about the Prime Minister's trip to New York for the UN General Assembly and the challenges she faces this week on the domestic front as the cost of living. Still with us, those rocketing bills still there. First, it's your weather.
Hello. Quite a lot of cloud around for many of us over the next couple of days. There will be some breaks in the cloud, allowing a little brightness to come through at times, but for the majority of us, it is a dry looking picture, and that's all thanks to this large area of high pressure dominating the weather across much of the UK, both today and through much of the rest of the week. But there is a change coming. This weather front, which is bringing thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain to the far north and northwest of Scotland, will eventually make progress southeastwards, but not until the latter part of the week. Until then, it's a largely dry picture, quite a lot of cloud around for many of us, and that cloud just about thick enough to produce a few light drizzly showers here and there, but that's the exception rather than the rule. And as I mentioned, there will be some breaks in the cloud at times, so a little bit of